to Kinship Connects, a podcast from SDA Kinship, sharing our stories and our journeys. My name is Floyd Poynitz, and today it's my great privilege to speak with Dr. Samuel Pang. And we invite you to join us today as we go on a journey with Samuel and discovering his connection with kinship and what he's doing today. So Samuel, thanks for joining us.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to this for a long time. We've talked about it, and so I know you have a busy schedule, and I'm glad that you took some time out today to be with us. So tell us just a little bit, for those in kinship probably know you very well already, and those who are maybe not familiar with kinship, tell us who you are, where you're located, that kind of thing.
Okay, I am a physician, and I have been living in the Boston area since 1993. And I have a busy practice here. My specialty is reproductive medicine. I'm currently with the IVF center called Boston IVF, which is one of the largest IVF centers in the country. And that's where I am.
Cool.
And I live here with my husband and two sons. My older son is actually 17 today. It's his birthday.
Wow. Happy birthday to him. Yeah.
And my younger son is 13. He turned 13 in July this summer.
Awesome. And we'll maybe touch on them just a little bit later as well, but can't believe where the years have gone. You and I have known each other for a long time. I think at one point you lived in Southern California.
I did. I did my graduate school at UCLA, so I was in Southern California in the Los Angeles area in the late 80s.
Yeah. You see, when I first joined Kinship, even before I went to a camp meeting or anything like that, I came to a board meeting, and that I believe was at your house in Southern California. And that was my very first exposure to any physical person or whatever from SDA Kinship. So yeah, we've had a long history. And so yeah, but I want to take us back even farther, back to when you were little, toddling around there. Where were you born? Where did you grow up? What was your home life like?
Sure. I was born and raised in Singapore.
Okay.
And I left Singapore when I was 16 years old. I grew up in an Adventist family. My parents were both devout Seventh-day Adventist. My father, as a child, my father grew up, I believe he grew up Anglican, but when he met my mother, he converted to Adventism. And when I was growing up, my father was the chaplain at the hospital there, the Youngberg Memorial Adventist Hospital.
Okay.
And my mother, who trained as a midwife, worked as a nurse at the hospital. Eventually, my father became a church pastor. After working for a few years at the Voice of Prophecy, he became a church pastor. And so I, grew up being a pastor's kid.
Wow. Okay. And all the responsibilities and challenges that come with that.
Yes.
Yeah. And you grew up in a medical family, so you were always around medical field type of things. Yeah.
That's correct. Since both my parents worked in a hospital setting, that was we lived in that area, and it was sort of in my environment.
Okay. And so you grew up in an Adventist community as well?
Yes. It was a very closed Adventist community. I went to an Adventist school, the Seventh-day Adventist school, from first grade all the way through high school. And attended church, and it was all very tightly knit Adventist community.
Okay. So I'm about to ask you what brought you and your family over at the age of 16 to the US, but before that, did you already figure out that there was something different about you?
Yes, I think
Okay.
that, you know, by the time I was 6 or 7,
Mm,
I knew that I was different. Um, I wasn't attracted to girls, um, as well. Let me rephrase that. I would say that, I was uh, more curious about boys than girls.
uh-huh.
Um, and so by the time I was 9 or 10 or 11, it became clear to me that I was, as I was starting puberty, I started um, realizing that I was, sexually and romantically and fantasizing about boys as opposed to girls.
Mm-hmm.
And that was very different. And so I was, you know, puzzled by this, and also did a lot of reading in the school library.
Uh-huh.
Um, and of course, everything that I read told me that I was a pervert and sinful. And so it became
Yeah.
something that I had to sort of hide deep inside myself and never shared with anybody.
Yeah. And it was probably not a common topic there in the church in Singapore or anything like that.
It was never. I don't think that I ever heard it mention
Mm-hmm.
homosexuality or anything like that.
Uh-huh.
The way that I attached that label to myself was from reading, because I realized that I was different, and so I started reading.
Yeah. Yeah. It checked all the boxes for you, the
Right.
description that you were reading about.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Did your parents find out about, or did you share with anyone while you were in Singapore?
No, I did not share with anybody. It was a deep secret that I kept inside.
Okay. 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 So then jumping forward then to the age of 16, what brought you uh to a new
So
country?
I have two older brothers who, after they graduated high school, they moved to Canada, to Montreal actually, for college. And after they graduated college, they decided not to return to Singapore. And so that was when my family decided that we didn't want the family to be split
Hmm.
between two continents.
Mm-hmm.
And the timing worked out because my dad was offered the pastorship at the Vancouver Chinese Seventh-day Adventist Church. And
Ah,
so that's how we moved from Singapore to Vancouver, Canada. And my dad was the pastor there for over 20 years.
wow. Wow. Okay.
So I
Okay.
continued being a PK in Vancouver.
Uh-huh.
Um,
Uh-huh. Yeah. Did you like BC?
I love BC.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's a very beautiful place. I went to college and medical school there.
Okay.
Um, and after medical school was when I left home
Mhm.
to do my internship and residency in Toronto. And after
Okay.
that, I moved to Los Angeles for my graduate training in reproductive medicine,
Mm-hmm.
um, and then moved to Boston, where I've been for 29 years.
Wow. Wow. Great. Great. So yeah, so you've moved from Vancouver to Toronto. You were kind of on your own for the first time, is that right, when you were in Toronto?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
And I will confess that one of the reasons that I chose to move far away for my
Mm-hmm.
internship and residency was so that I could um, get away and sort of come out
Mm-hmm.
in a sense,
Right.
because I had to remain strictly closeted while living in Vancouver with my father being the church pastor there.
Right.
Um, but that's also when I started um, becoming involved with kinship, shall we say.
Mm-hmm.
The year that I um, graduated from medical school
Mm-hmm.
was also the year when I discovered kinship through a Spectrum magazine.
Oh,
They
okay.
had
So that's
just,
how you found out. Okay.
it was 1982, 1983.
Okay.
And they had just published I think there were 3 articles
Mhm.
on uh, homosexuality and the kinship camp meeting that they had just had in
Right.
1980. And so that's where I discovered the existence of kinship. Um, I wrote to kinship.
Mhm.
Thankfully, there was an address for contact there.
Yeah.
And the secretary of kinship at the time, Doug Oda, wrote me back a very nice, long, personal, handwritten letter and sent me a lot of information.
Hmm.
Um, and I was about to do an elective in my medical school for 8 weeks at Loma Linda.
Hmm.
And so when I was there, they happened to be a kinship board meeting at the home of Ben Piquel in
Okay.
Palm
Yeah.
Desert.
Uh-huh.
I believe this was in 1983.
Wow.
Um, and they arranged for Dennis Grau
Mhm.
to drive me. He picked me up in Loma Linda where I was staying,
Uh-huh.
and drove me to Ben Piquel's home.
Hmm.
And that was my first meeting with real life
Wow.
gay Adventists.
Also a board meeting experience like mine. Yeah.
Yes, right.
Yeah. Yeah. So what did you think? Did you feel like this is my tribe, or were you kind of hesitant and
No,
wary?
I immediately felt like I have found my family.
Yeah.
This is where I belong.
Cool.
And everybody was, very open, um, very welcoming.
Hmm.
Um, and it was just such a good feeling. It was such a heavy burden off my shoulders that I wasn't the only gay Adventist in the world, and that
Right.
there are all these other people who are gay Adventists.
Yeah.
Um, and then they told me about camp meeting.
Hmm.
And so August of 1983, uh, so I graduated from medical school in May of 83, moved to Toronto, and then in August of 83, I attended my first kinship camp meeting,
Okay.
and it
Okay.
was in Pennsylvania at that time,
Yeah.
uh, Pottstown, Pennsylvania, or something like that,
Okay.
Boylston, Pennsylvania. Um,
That was in Colin Cook's
that was
backyard, wasn't it? Sort
it,
of.
right. It wasn't too
Yeah.
far away. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and so it was like you said, I found my tribe, I found my people, and I felt very, very comfortable
Hmm. Hmm.
spending a week with all these other gay Adventists, which was
Awesome.
quite remarkable.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, you grew up in a conservative Adventist environment. You grew up in an Asian culture, which is another layer of conservatism.
Right.
Conservatism. So, so that was very difficult dealing with being gay and feeling different and not knowing anyone else to share with.
Right.
So before you read that Spectrum article, had you run into other Adventist gay people?
Nope.
Not at all. So that was your very first contact or inkling that there were others out there like you.
Well, let me, at the Adventist church, uh, there was a scandal.
Okay.
There was a teacher at the Adventist high school or academy there,
Hmm.
Deer Lake Academy, at the time, who I don't know the details of it, but apparently there was some kind of a note that was found in his pocket of his jacket, and that outed him. He had
Oh.
2 sons who were teenagers, and so I heard the buzz about that, and I thought, oh,
Hmm.
there's I'm not the only person, but I
Right.
didn't know this man.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was about the same age as his teenage sons,
Okay. Okay.
um, and there was a lot of uh, buzz and gossip and scandal going on,
Yeah.
but that was about it.
Right. Right. So I think there's always been a scandal in the Adventist church regarding the topic of LGBT, and it's always been swept under the carpet as quickly as possible.
Right.
So yeah. So that's not surprising.
And this is back in the late 70s
Oh yeah,
and
yeah,
early
yeah,
80s.
yeah. So yeah, exactly. So you were introduced to Kinship, and at some point, I think, I mean, you've always been a wonderful supporter of Kinship throughout the years. So I want to say thank you for that. That's great in your participation and with Kinship and the board and things. But at one point, I think you actually helped start a
Yes.
Kinship in Canada, right?
Yes, I
So
did. I was living in Toronto. I lived in Toronto for 5 years.
uh-huh.
And from 83 to 88. And as I stated, when I went to Kinship Camp meeting the first time, I realized that this is where I belong. This is my home.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I vowed to keep attending every camp meeting. And I think for the next 20 years or so, I attended every camp meeting
Mm-hmm.
there
Mm-hmm.
was to attend every year,
Right. Right.
because it was like, a family reunion every year.
Sure. Yeah.
Um, and I also said, there's got to be other gay people in Canada. So I uh, worked really hard to try and organize um, a kinship chapter, shall we say,
Mm-hmm.
in Canada.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um, I registered Kinship Canada as a nonprofit organization,
Mm-hmm.
um, and connected with a handful of people, 2 or 3 people in the Toronto area, and got that going. Um, but then, of course, it came to an end when I had to leave Toronto to move to Los Angeles. I
Right.
handed that over to uh, some other people who were in
Mhm.
Toronto, and I don't know what happened, but it kind of didn't get
Yeah.
continued for many years, and I don't know what's happening up there at this point in time.
Yeah. Unfortunately, with the legalities behind creating a nonprofit and an organization like that, there's a lot of paperwork to file, and it takes dedicated people to continue that.
Right,
And so in Canada, I mean, the nonprofit went away, but we still have a great group up in Canada.
great,
An East Coast group and a West Coast group, and
great.
so yeah, it's great. And
Yeah,
uh,
for the time that I was there, I would do all the paperwork and the filings and everything,
yeah,
but I couldn't keep doing that once I moved away, so I had to
exactly,
delegate that
exactly.
to
Right,
somebody
right.
else.
Yeah. So that came back under the umbrella of Kinship International, and
Right.
so yeah. So thanks for starting that though in Canada. I know the people that are listening to this now that live in Canada will be thankful for your hard work back then in creating that chapter.
I
Um,
tried.
yeah, hey, and that's what we're all doing. We're a lot of volunteers and doing the best to spread the word. So yeah. And like I said, you've kept in touch. You never did the change ministry things, did you?
No, I did not.
That was a good thing,
Thankfully, I
right?
did not. Right.
Yeah. Was that something that just never interested you? I mean, you felt
Well,
confident that
I didn't know about it until
okay.
I went to camp meeting in '83, and that was the first. Well, actually, I take that back because in the Spectrum article they had talked about the Change Ministries thing with Colin Cook.
Hmm.
So I was aware of that, um, but I think I was smarter than to fall for that.
Yeah,
I
good,
was already ready to graduate medical school, and I knew better than to get involved in the change ministry.
good,
Um,
good.
I was
Yeah.
just I was actually ready to come out, but
Hmm.
I couldn't in Vancouver because my dad was the pastor of the church there,
Right,
and
right.
so I needed to get away to come out,
Yeah.
and that's what I did.
So how was that process? Because I said, there were several layers for you there. And for a lot of us, we have several layers of coming out, the Adventist, the family, the whatever. Uh, was it met with a lot of resistance, or did they say, "Hey, Samuel, we love you and that's okay"?
Well, I was very fortunate because, after about being involved with kinship for about maybe 3 years or so, um, I think I think it was 1986 that I went back to Vancouver for my grandmother's funeral, and that's when I came out to my parents.
Uh-huh.
Um, and my I came out to my dad, not to my mom. His response in a nutshell was, I don't understand why you have chosen this lifestyle, but you are my son and I will always love you. Um, and so I realized that he needed education. I assumed that he shared it with my mom, but he did not.
Oh.
And then so I started uh, sending my parents books. I signed them up for the Kinship Connection so that they would see what kinship was about and all of
Mhm.
that.
Mhm.
And then my mom suddenly said, "What's going on?" And then my dad had to tell her that I had come out to him. Um, and then I had to have a conversation with my mom, and she was also very loving and accepting. She said that you are my son, I will always love you. Um, but her concern was that I was going to contract AIDS and die. So you have to
Mm.
remember this was in the late 80s, mid to late 80s,
Right.
when this was all going on. And I had to reassure her that, I was smart enough not to protect myself, and
Mhm.
that she didn't have to worry about that.
Okay.
So
Good. 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 So they became supportive of you, maybe not fully understanding the whole everything about it, but they were supportive of their son.
that's
Yeah.
correct. And that's all I could ask for, that
Yeah.
I had heard of other horror stories of parents disowning their children, and I was expecting that could happen, but
Hmm.
it did not. They
Okay.
embraced me and said, we don't understand this, but you're our son, and we will always love you, which
Yeah.
was good. And I, was very grateful for that reaction. And
Hmm.
I said, what I need to do is I need to educate them. And
Yeah.
so that's when I started sending them books, uh, signed them up for Kinship Connection, which they received,
Hmm.
you know, for years.
Right.
Um, and by the time I met and got married to my husband,
Hmm.
um, they were fully supportive. They both
Good.
attended the wedding in
Wow. That's a big step.
2003. My
Yeah.
entire family was at our wedding.
Wow. Great.
And at the wedding reception, um, we had like 240 guests at the wedding.
Hmm.
At the wedding reception, my dad came up to me as I was speaking and with the mic and said, "Is it okay if I say a few words?" And I
Uh-oh.
panicked because it wasn't in the plans and I didn't know what he was going to say.
Sure.
Um, and when he took the mic, he said, the first words out of his mouth were, "I want everybody here to know that I'm very proud of my son."
Mm.
And with that statement, everybody in the room started crying
Yeah.
because it
Yeah.
was back in 2003,
Hmm.
this coming from an Adventist pastor,
Yeah.
attending
Amazing.
his son's wedding to another man.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and we actually, Andrew and I, as background, had a church wedding.
Hmm.
Um,
Okay.
so it was at a congregational church where his family attended,
Okay.
and we had a minister do a very, very traditional church
Uh-huh.
wedding. It was,
Nice.
and there were actually a lot of kinship people who were invited and
Yeah.
attended our wedding.
Yeah. Awesome. Awesome. That's yeah, quite a heartwarming story there. That is good to hear. Good to hear. And that leads me to my next question. One of the questions I always get from new members or from members, period, is how do I find a partner? Or I'm looking for a partner. Where can I find, the love of my life or whatever? So, are you wanting to share just a little bit about how you met your husband? Or
I would be absolutely happy to do that. So, when I first became involved in kinship, my fantasy was to get married to an Adventist man.
right?
Um, and so I was hoping that I would meet and fall in love with somebody,
Mhm.
through kinship.
Right.
Um, and I would say that I dated a few people through kinship,
Hmm.
but they ended up all being long distance,
Right.
and that just didn't work out very well.
Yeah.
Um, and long story short, when I was living in Boston here, the only time I had contact with kinship was at camp meeting, and you just
Mhm.
really that just wasn't. It was a good place to meet friends, but it wasn't really a source of meeting a life partner.
Sure. Sure.
And so I started saying, okay, this is a fantasy, but I'm going to have to widen my net.
Uh-huh.
And so I started dating non-Adventist people.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, and that was how I met my husband. Um,
Okay.
there was a group here in the Boston area of group of professionals
Mhm.
who get together for socialization,
Mhm.
and so that was how I met Andrew.
Cool. Cool. And that was what, almost 20 years ago, or
Right, I first met him in 1998, I think, or 99.
okay, so over
um,
20.
and but at the time he was dating somebody else, so um, he kept my card that I gave him, and after that relationship broke up, he called me and we
Mhm.
started dating, and then we eventually got married.
Wow. Wow. Congratulations. That's great. That's great. It's good to hear these stories of long-term relationships that are lasting. And yeah, yeah. So that's great. That's great. We're proving the people wrong that always spew the hate rhetoric to us about, relationships don't last, and et cetera, et
Absolutely.
cetera. So
I
yeah.
mean, one of the things that uh, Andrew and I shared in common was that we wanted to have a family.
Hmm.
Um, and so after we got married, we started working on having a family.
Okay.
And
Okay.
since I had been treating other gay men
Hmm.
um, with egg donation and gestational surrogacy to help them have their family,
Uh-huh.
after we married, it was a simple step for us to do that ourselves.
Right. Right.
And that is how we ended up with two sons,
Awesome.
who is now 17 and who are now 17 and 13
Yeah,
years old.
awesome. And we're gonna talk about that a little bit more next time. And so this is Kinship Awareness Month. So I want to make sure that people are aware of kinship and all that it offers. And do you have any advice for someone who's queer and Adventist and thinking about coming out, or not sure if they should join kinship or that kind of thing? Any words of wisdom for them?
Well, all I can say is, my own experience with
Hmm.
kinship has been a blessing,
Okay.
um, because with my background being raised in a conservative Asian Adventist family, um, I was really struggling with
Hmm.
my identity.
Hmm.
Um, and kinship literally saved my life in the sense that it opened up this whole new world to me.
Wow. Yeah.
Um, and attending all the early camp meetings, being able to speak with the Adventist clergy who were invited to participate. I had, this realization that, I'm not the bad person that
Right.
I was led to believe.
Yeah.
And that I can be a healthy, productive person and live a healthy life
Yeah.
and have a family.
Exactly.
And that is exactly what I aim to do. And that is exactly what I have accomplished. And
Wonderful.
I would say, without boasting, that, I have demonstrated that, gay people can have a very successful professional life and a very successful family life and build a family just like anybody else.
Yeah, exactly. There's nothing broken about being a rainbow person other than the downtrodden that church and society puts upon us and tries to break us. But
Right.
so yeah. So Dr. Samuel Peng, thank you so much for sharing with us today. And
My pleasure.
we're going to have some more with you later. So we ask our listeners to stay tuned because there's going to be another episode. But for right now, thanks for sharing with us today. And we hope that today's podcast was interesting and has given our listeners some things to think about. Seventh-day Adventist Kinship is the only LGBTQIA+ affirming community for current and former Adventists. And we welcome not only the Rainbow Alphabet members, but also parents and family members who want to learn more about how to support their loved ones, as well as supportive allies who stand with us and stand up for us to make a difference in our church and our world. You can check us out on the web at sdakinship.org, or you can follow us on social media at SDA Kinship. And if you have any questions or comments, we always love to hear from you. You can email me info@sdakinship.org. And we look forward to having you with us on the next podcast where we find out more about Dr. Samuel Peng. So thanks again. Remember, this is Kinship Awareness Month, so be sure and share and spread the news about kinship. Thank you very much.
Thank you.